Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our Seed of Hope lecture series. It's a pleasure to be here. We're very excited to be here, get to meet you, and get to speak with you. So my name is Helen Huang. I am a senior consultant with a US-based consulting company called ICF International. So we work in the sectors of transportation, environment, energy, and healthcare. And my specialty happens to be aviation. So I work with airlines and airports in the US as well as around the world. And my specialty is air traffic forecasting and modeling, as well as aviation strategy. So today, I'd like to talk to you guys about air service development around the world, including in the Caucasus and in Georgia. So I thought we'd run through some fun facts and figures first about airline service. So how many passengers worldwide are transported on airlines in a year, do you think, out of these numbers? 94 million? No, the 2.97 billion passengers are transported on commercial airlines around the world in a year. That's a lot of people, right? So that's a lot of people getting on planes and being flown all around the world. The largest airport in the world is, does anyone have a guess? Close, Chicago is very big. It's another airport in the US. Atlanta Airport. And how many passengers do you think pass through Atlanta Airport in a year? 94 million, that's a lot of passengers. Who knows what the population of Georgia is? Okay, 4 million. So that's about 25 times the amount of population in this country flowing through Atlanta Airport every year. So that's how big this industry is. How many airlines do you think there are in this world? Commercial airlines. Okay, I'll help you guys out there. 1397, so about 1,400 commercial airlines exist in the various countries in the world. And how many aircraft do you think they fly? $25,000 commercial aircraft are flying around in the skies every moment right now. How many airports do you think are in the world? Yes, actually. In terms of commercial airports, such as Tbilisi International Airport, there are 3,800 commercial international airports where you can get on a commercial airplane, but there are 41,000 airfields around the world that include military as well as general aviation facilities. So that's a lot of airports around the world. And finally, what do you think is the load factor? It's an industry term, but for every plane that gets in the sky, what percentage of the seats do you think are filled? 79%. 80%. It's one of the highest occupancy rates of any mode of transport in the world. The average for trains is 40%. The average for buses is 60%. The average for cars is 30%. But the average for the aviation industry in 2015 is 80%. For every plane that flies in the sky, on average, 80% of those seats are occupied. So it's a very exciting industry. And today we'll just cover some basics about the airline industry, how airlines think, how they start new services in different markets and regions, and also how you guys do compared to other regions of the world. Okay, so as I mentioned, for this talk, we'll briefly introduce the commercial aviation industry. We'll talk about how airlines actually plan their networks, what they think about when they start airline services. We'll talk about what exactly is air service development and how airports and markets and destinations actually go out there and work with airlines to get more airline service for their communities. And we'll talk about some of the current air service trends and future opportunities. So the first thing is that air traffic growth is intimately connected to economic growth, GDP growth. And historically, you can see over the last 30 years or so, world traffic growth has actually outpaced GDP growth with an elasticity of about 2, meaning for every % of annual GDP growth, air traffic growth has grown by double that amount. And industry analysts doing a forecast out the next 20 years or so expect that trend to continue and for air traffic growth to actually increase at a faster and faster pace. So overall, people are expecting air traffic, passengers who are flying, to increase by between 4 to 5% every year. In recent years, the airline industry has been experiencing record profitability. So this is an industry that has experienced a lot of ups and downs over the years. It's a very expensive job to fly airplanes. Does anyone want to guess how much does it cost to fly an airplane, say, from Tbilisi to the US? It takes about 200,000 US dollars for one wide-body flight from somewhere like here, Central Asia, to the US. That's how much it costs to operate that aircraft. So airlines put a lot of effort into planning their network, planning which markets they enter into. And due to various factors, the industry has experienced these huge swings over the decades, over the years. Years of okay profits and years of deep loss. And in recent years, overall, the global aviation industry has been doing very well. And part of it has been more emphasis on careful network planning and what we call capacity discipline, which is doing very careful study of the markets they go into to make sure that the right amount of capacity is introduced for the right-sized markets. Just to run through some of the top airlines by region, these are some of the largest airlines in the world. For the US, the largest airlines are American, Delta, United, you've probably heard of. Southwest, who's heard of Southwest? Low-cost carrier, that's actually the second largest passenger airline in the US right now. Here in the US, can you guys see that? What's the largest passenger airline in terms of number of passengers carried? Ryanair, LCC. Second largest is Air France KLM, and then EasyJet, Lufthansa. And in the Middle East, Emirates, Saudia, Qatar, etc., are all really big airlines. And other airlines are also growing fast in other regions of the world. So this chart shows the increase in passenger traffic as well as airline capacity, meaning airline seats and flights that have been introduced year over year. So in the past, airlines have been very aggressive in terms of introducing a lot of airline capacity into markets, where you can see the blue chart has greatly outpaced the darker blue chart, the darker blue. In more recent years, we've seen airlines being very careful, as I mentioned, in terms of network planning and making sure that they enter markets that, with the right-sized aircraft, that can contribute profitably to their networks. Overall, in the next 20 years, as I mentioned, industry forecasts estimate about a 4% average annual growth in terms of global air passenger journeys. And the largest growth that we expect to see will be in the Middle East, Asia Pacific, where you can see them growing at about 5% per year. But continued growth we expect to see even in mature markets such as Europe at 2.6%, and North America 3.3% in passenger growth per year. This means a lot of new orders for aircraft manufacturers, and this industry has seen a ton of technological innovation over the past couple of decades. So a lot of new technology is enabling aircraft to fly longer ranges, more fuel efficiently, which is of great benefit to airlines and also passengers like us. So let's talk a bit about what airlines think about when they actually develop their network and think about which markets to go into. So what factors do airlines evaluate in starting a new route? The first thing is that every airline has a whole network that they're thinking about, not just one particular destination or market, but they have a whole network that they want to make sure any new routes fit well into. So they're planning their aircraft utilization on a whole network basis. They're thinking about their airline hubs, where those hubs are and which markets can provide good connections to and from that hub. They're thinking about their overall strategy for short-haul markets versus long-haul markets, their strategy by region, how much they want to grow in Asia this year versus in Europe versus in Latin America. They're also thinking about alliances they may have with other airlines around the world and which markets they can have good support in when they enter. Of course, the most important factor that airlines consider is the predicted traffic and financial performance of that route when they put in the new airline service. They think about various risks and opportunities for starting that new airline service, and also how that route ranks in comparison to the whole plethora of other routes that they could be also entering and considering. So different types of airlines will consider different factors. The traditional airlines, which are what we would call the full-service airlines or the network carriers, such as your Turkish Airlines, American Airlines, Lufthansa, they have a very formal planning process where the planning is often centralized with very little input from their regional offices. There is a very long planning horizon, which involves many different departments in making these decisions about where they put in new service. And their expansion plan is really guided by some of these overarching long-term strategy concerns that the airline may have about what markets they want to be in, how fast they want to grow, et cetera. And most of all, they're focused on profitability. For smaller airlines, or airlines such as the low-cost carriers, which have really been gaining momentum in recent years, there's often a less formal process in terms of their network planning. They value the input of their regional representatives more in general, with fewer decision makers, with these new service decisions being able to be made much more quickly. And rather than on profitability, a lot of their emphasis is on growth, capturing more market shares, entering more markets, growing their networks. And they really want to think about just ways to stimulate markets to get high volumes of traffic that they rely on. So typically, the planning process for a network carrier or full-service carrier is long. So we're talking about years, 5 years. So 5 years before actually entering a market, an airline will actually start to order the right aircraft for that market they plan to enter into. They'll start to think of the product that they'll be advertising in that market. They'll start to invest in the right airport facilities for that new service they'll be starting. And then from about 1.5 to 3 years' time, they'll actually start recruiting staff, crews. They'll work out the schedule. They'll do a lot of more detailed market planning. And then finally, within that year that they plan to start service, there'll be the finalization of staffing, gates, airport costs and rates and slots, et cetera. Whereas for some of the smaller airlines, especially the low-cost carriers, we see a much more streamlined process where they're able to make these decisions in a matter of 1 to 2 years. So the first consideration that goes into making this kind of decision for an airline is the market. And when we talk about the market, we're really talking about the amount of passenger traffic that is in this market that the airline could capture when they start service. So there's a lot of very detailed analysis that goes into understanding the market size of a particular destination, how many passengers travel throughout the year to which destinations, the seasonality of it, whether passengers tend to travel more over summer or over winter, or if we see pretty constant flows through the year. We look at historic stimulation. When new nonstop service is started, has this market responded? Do people get on those new airline services? Do we see a huge increase in terms of passenger traffic that will now fly now that there is a more convenient nonstop service? So this is just an example of Amsterdam, Panama City traffic. which shows the historic number of monthly passengers over a period of time before a service started, which you can see was about 395 passengers per month traveling between these two markets, Amsterdam and Panama City. And once KLM entered that market and started service, that new service stimulated the market by almost threefold, increasing the monthly passengers to about 1,000 passengers per month. So airlines do a lot of very detailed of market flows and passenger volume before they would enter a market. They also consider what we call market share, which is even if they fly in a market and they put in a nonstop service, it doesn't mean that all the passengers flying between two particular destinations will get on their plane. So for example, in this example of Santiago, Chile, and New York, we see various routings that passengers take today to travel between these 2 points. So there's a nonstop offered by LAN, LA is the code there. There are also various connecting possibilities over Miami, where passengers could take a land flight from Santiago to Miami and then transfer onto an American flight from Miami to New York City. Or there are other options to connect over Lima and Atlanta, etc. So because of the ton of air service that's in the market, passengers have a lot of options, a lot of connecting possibilities. So airlines then do a lot of analysis on what share of the total market they can expect to capture with a particular service they put in. So if there are 100,000 people per year traveling between Santiago and New York City, they do a lot of analysis to see how their service stacks up against competing services. And out of that 100,000 annual passengers, what share they can expect to get on their plane, whether it's 20,000, 30,000, 40,000, 50,000, etc. There's a lot of analysis that goes into putting in the right-sized aircraft for a particular market also. And various factors that are considered by airlines include range. Different types of aircraft can fly different ranges. And for a short-haul aircraft, you have more number of options versus very long-haul routes where only certain types, more limited type number of aircraft can make that flight. They want to make sure you put in an aircraft with the right range, the right size in terms of number of seats. If you only have 200 passengers traveling between 2 points per day, you don't want to put in an aircraft that can seat 500 and have 300 empty seats and only 200 seats occupied. You want to put in an aircraft that can seat 200 seats and have those 200 seats fully occupied to make it worth that flight. And there are also various other operating restrictions they consider, such as runway length, where the airport is situated in terms of altitude and longitude and latitude, and noise restrictions for the community, etc. Finally, when they come to actually scheduling the flight, a lot of consideration actually goes into that you may not know about. What days of the week they operate, what times they operate, whether it's a morning flight, afternoon flight, evening flight. So here are some of the major considerations that airlines take into account. Most airlines will have an airline hub that they flow flights into to maximize the number of connections that are possible. So any new service that an airline starts will be timed to make the maximum number of connections at that airline hub that new service feeds. So that is an important factor they consider in scheduling a new service. Also, they look at schedules of alliance partners. So if Turkish Airlines is starting a new flight to, say, Boston, they look at who they partner with at Boston. So if they have a partnership with JetBlue, they put a lot of analysis into JetBlue's existing flights at Boston to make sure that their flight from Istanbul to Boston can maximize the amount of connections with their partner, JetBlue, at Boston. Also, considerations include whether that market is a business market or a leisure market, or what we call a VFR, visiting friends and relatives market, which also plays into what times are convenient to people, and many other types of analyses and considerations for the weekly frequencies and seasonal versus year-round service for a new airline service that is started. Oops. So here is just an example of an airline bank and what that looks like. So if we have the hours of the day running across the bottom from 7 a.m. in the morning through 10 p.m. at night, and what we see here is flights above the axes are arrivals into Panama City by Copa Airlines, which is based there in Panama. And the bars below the axes represent departures out of Panama City. You see that airlines actually create these banks at their airline hubs. So they have a large number of flights coming in at 8 a.m., and then a large number of flights going out at 9 a.m. And with that 1 hour difference to allow for the maximum number of connections between the arrivals and the departures. And they'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, multiple banks running throughout the day to really facilitate connections at these hubs. So what is air service development? What do airports and destinations and markets have to do to actually get new service from airlines? So the objective of air service development is to either create more nonstop services that you don't currently have, to maintain your existing flights, and also to, in general, just promote growth, even for markets that are currently served, to increase the frequencies, to get larger aircraft in there, better schedules, etc. And air service development is a process that airports and destinations and regions actually spend a lot of money investing in order to really bring in the service that their communities want and need. So, for example, in the US, I've worked with most of the large hub US airports, including Boston, Logan, Los Angeles Airport, Miami Airport, JFK, Dallas, Baltimore, Washington, and all of these big airports spend a lot of money in what we call air service development, which means that services don't just start by magic, but airports and markets actually are day by day interacting with these airlines and exchanging communications and exchanging analyses to really plan out the markets that make sense and to make sure that new service, especially international services, are gained quickly. So why does your airport or destination need air service development? So this map shows the number of airports around the world. As we said, almost 40,000 airfields and almost 2,000 commercial airports. So you can think about the amount of competition there is in basically competing destinations who are also looking to gain new service, whereas airlines have very limited fleets and resources. So aircraft, as we mentioned, are very expensive to operate. They're very, very expensive to own also. So airlines have a limited number of aircraft to utilize and to send into markets. So in order to get a new international service, for example, with a wide-body aircraft, the difference between getting it this year versus 10 years down the line can be the difference between how much an airport or a community is engaged in what we call air service marketing, how much they get in front of the airlines and really understand the network planning process for airlines to provide the analyses that airlines need to put in a new service. There's a team of stakeholders that you can put together, so not only the airport, but tourism agencies, businesses, local businesses, a whole team of stakeholders who are engaged in wanting to make this new service happen, and also various incentives that it is now common for airports to offer airlines in order to start new service that may need to be subsidized. So a couple of factors which play into air service development strategy. Generally, there is a diagnostic piece with a lot of detailed benchmarking and historic evaluation and understanding of airline strategy. There is a prioritization of market opportunities. So if I'm an airport, I look at the 1,000 of destinations that I'd like new service to, but I'm going to prioritize out of those 1,000, the 10 markets that I think I have a good shot of getting new service to, and then I'm going to find ways, I'm going to have an implementation plan and create very targeted business cases to really move towards getting service for those 10 target markets. So airport marketers actually do play a significant role in influencing the decision-making of airlines. An airline's goal is to minimize risk when opening a new route, so it's very helpful when airports are able to show that they can reduce or share the risks by either reducing airport costs or providing other economic incentives such as marketing assistance or other types of subsidies for the airline. The airline wants to make the best use of limited resources, including aircraft and crew, and even planning analysts. They cannot analyze all the potential opportunities around the world. So more and more it's become common for airports and destinations to help the airlines by providing their own analysis and business cases, and to help airlines make that decision and to guarantee that they are presenting a good opportunity that could be profitable. So this is more of the same, so I won't go into this in more detail. Generally, airports and destinations will meet with airlines and prepare business cases, which include market information, analysis of the existing market flows and demand, a business case for why their particular market or destination fits in with the airline strategy, a detailed route forecast, which includes forecasts of traffic and financial performance if that target airline were to start service, any kind of support they're willing to put together for the new service, as well as any other technical information about the airport that the airline may find helpful. So just some examples of what usually gets shown in these business cases that are presented to airlines, various types of analyses, for example, about historically how that type of airline has fared in that market, as well as various breakdowns of traffic and market share and fare and yield analysis that the airline may find helpful. They're very complex models that are used to actually figure out new flights that are put in and the impact to an airline's network. And forecasts that are shown to airlines usually include forecasts of local passengers, connecting passengers, and which connecting markets passengers are expected to connect through, revenues, load factors, and fares, etc. And as I mentioned, in today's world, it's become more and more common for airports to share some of the risk by offering various financial incentives for airlines to start service to their community. So common incentives that are provided include discounts on airport fees, revenue guarantees, funding for advertising and marketing, etc., as well as creating teams of stakeholders, including local tourism agencies, as I mentioned, local businesses, to really show the airline that the community is behind a new service and would support a new airline service. And those are some other types of airport discounts that are provided as well. So what are some future trends and opportunities then? Currently, one of the main most interesting trends in the aviation industry right now is the drop in fuel cost and how that has been impacting the industry. So fuel historically has represented the largest cost for an airline's operations, making up to 40% of an airline's operating costs. But as you guys know, in recent years, especially in the last year and a half, the drop in fuel has really had a huge impact on the airline industry. With that reduction of cost, it has allowed for airlines to grow at a significantly faster pace than before. Some of the impacts we expect from that trend is that older airplanes that were less fuel efficient can be kept in service longer. We can see airlines investing in more new services and starting service to more new destinations. Airports can expect to see larger increases in passengers. And even for passengers, an increase of disposable income typically will result in higher air travel demand as well. We continue to see a lot of evolving airline strategy, which is very exciting to watch. There's a new long-haul, low-cost model that is emerging and which has impacts for many smaller communities and markets that have thinner market flows, such as the Caucasus area, region, and Georgia. So these two maps show the difference in Norwegian, which is a European low-cost carrier, in Norwegian's network from 2013 through 2015. So in 2013, as you can see, they had a very large network covering most of Europe. But in 2015, with the acquisition of new aircraft, such as the Boeing 787, which allows for a small aircraft to fly much longer distances, they have, as you can see, added a ton of longer haul international services, which is something that was not possible in the industry even 5 years ago. So what we're seeing is that these new aircraft technologies are allowing airlines to fly long-haul international services that even 5 years ago were not profitable to operate. So this has a lot of implications for smaller markets that are looking to grow international services and is very hopeful for even like regions like Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan in terms of getting additional long-haul services into Asia, into the US, into Latin America, into Australia, which do not exist today. We continue to see new global network carriers emerging. So, for example, the Middle Eastern carriers have really thrived in the last decade or so, and we've seen the rise of airlines such as Emirates, Etihad, Qatar, etc. So the first at the top shows the network of Etihad Airways from 2008 to 2015. And you can see they've only been increasing. In the last 6-7 years, they've added about 40 new international destinations versus previously, historically, very established airlines such as Lufthansa, where over the last 7-8 years, they've been no growth at all, and actually their networks have contracted instead, where they've lost 8 to 10 destinations. So the Middle Eastern carriers are gaining ground really fast. So that includes Emirates, Etihad, Turkish Airlines, which is right here in your neighborhood. And again, it has a lot of implications for this region of the world in particular, where you guys are located at an optimum location to really connect passengers from east to west, especially from the US and Latin America to Asia and to the Pacific. And that is part of the reason why these Middle Eastern carriers and some of these Central Asian carriers are really increasing fast. We've also seen more niche carriers that are flourishing in secondary markets. And we've seen a lot of growth in Latin American markets and even African markets. And here, I know Air Georgia has a lot of ambitions to expand their network, and I expect to see in the next few years, in the coming years, also an increase in local airlines who are able to grow their networks substantially. So overall, in terms of the global aviation outlook beyond 2015, we expect to see continued air traffic growth due to population growth and economic growth and increasing air service liberalization. As fast as air traffic has grown over the past couple of decades, we expect air traffic to continue to grow at even faster rates going forward. Air travel demand by region. The fastest growing areas, as I mentioned, Asia, Middle East. There's a lot of air traffic growth in these regions in particular, while we expect to see slower growth in more mature markets like North America and Europe. And we expect to see continued LCC expansion in particular, and as I mentioned, new airline models that are evolving within the LCC sector, allowing for more long-haul international services, which many communities are really looking for. So currently, just a snapshot of the Caucasus region, where I'm including Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Armenia. So currently, the largest airport here in the Caucasus is the Baku airport, followed by Yerevan and Tbilisi. So this shows the number of annual seats in this region over the last 10 years. And you can see that Baku has maintained its status as the largest airport in this region, offering about 40% of total airline seats in the Caucasus. Right now, Yerevan and Tbilisi are about tied, second and third, offering about 25% of total seats in this region, average. Tbilisi actually has been the fastest growing airport in this region. And between 2005 and 2015, the airport here has seen about a 12% growth per year in terms of airline seats, compared to 7% in Baku, Azerbaijan, and 3.4% in Armenia. In terms of airline services right now, these are the destinations that are currently served from Tbilisi. So you guys have access to 42 destinations, mostly concentrated in Europe, the Middle East, and you are served by 29 airlines. But going forward, as I mentioned, with airlines aggressively growing, aided by things such as low fuel cost and economic growth, as well as more and more LCCs, low-cost carriers, who are expanding into these thinner international markets. I expect that you'll be able to see a lot of international growth in the next 5 to 10 years, including new services, possibly first to Asia and then to the US and Africa. Yerevan in Armenia, similar to Tbilisi, right now has about 43 destinations, mostly concentrated in Europe and Middle East, 36 airlines, whereas Baku right now has 66 destinations, and they offer significantly more diversity of destinations spanning not only Europe, Middle East, but also Asia, US, and Africa. They currently fly to JFK in the US right now, and I know airlines have plans to add more destinations. So that's just a snapshot of where the airline industry is globally right now, some of the factors that airlines consider in planning new service, what the large airlines are, and this process of air service development that airports and regions around the world are engaged in. More beneficial for airlines. So the industry we're talking about here is the commercial airline industry. So mostly talking about the transportation of passengers and cargo, not related to medical and military purposes. So typically, those services are provided by what we call general aviation operators, which are separate from this industry, but both equally important. Of course, you need both in any market and destination. In terms of expense and the cost, a lot of factors play into that. A lot of it is the length of the route that is flown. So actually, airlines that serve hospitals and things like agricultural purposes, military purposes, are often domestic, and they tend to be shorter haul, and actually overall are probably less expensive to operate than some of these international routes that require very expensive and heavy aircraft and a lot of fuel to operate. Thank you. No, I think there's a ton of regulations and work in terms of setting up a new airline. Is that what you're asking? Yes. I think that would be maybe more in Amy's sphere in terms of actually starting an entity, a commercial airline. But yes, it is not an easy process, and it's a very risky process too. So overall, one of the major trends in the industry has been consolidation, where we've seen the smaller airlines in particular struggling to remain profitable, and airlines either having to merge with larger airlines or having to go bankrupt, basically, in this kind of very competitive industry. So the large airlines are getting larger, and new airlines are still emerging, and a lot of the new airlines are the low-cost carrier model has become very popular. Like here in this region, I think, do you guys take Wizz Air or Pegasus? Pegasus Air? Pegasus? Yes, both of them fly here. So I think the LCC model is one type that is really thriving right now, with a lot of people who are interested in being able to fly for cheaper, and they don't care about so many of the amenities and services that the full-service carriers used to provide, like free check-in, meals on your plane, etc. So there is still market for new entrants, but for more smaller niche markets, such as the LCC segments. Safety is a big question. So there are agencies that regulate safety for different regions of the world. In the US, we have a Federal Aviation Administration that oversees a lot of the safety issues. The EU has their own agency that oversees EU regions, and I think all countries have their own safety and regulatory agencies. If you do not meet safety regulations, you can be blacklisted. So a number of the Asian and African airlines in particular are still on the blacklist for Europe and for the US, for example, and are not authorized to fly to any destinations in those countries or regions. So it is a very big concern, and airlines do put a lot of effort into making sure they maintain safety. So in the US, there are various laws governing aviation safety, and the airline is ultimately responsible, but there are various checkpoints. There's a lot of paperwork, a lot of milestones that they have to hit. So every year, they will make sure that safety inspectors get to inspect so many of the planes, etc., so that every aircraft in their fleet is inspected and is authorized to fly for every 3 to 5 years, something like that. So the airline is ultimately responsible. Usually the safety inspectors are staff of our government officials. And if an airline is found to violate safety precautions or safety regulations, the whole airline can be grounded, and the government can suspend their operations. So it is an important and big issue.